Christ is the one who's going to be lifted up.
Mrs. Pomeroy?
And that's what I'm telling everybody. You lean into what you don't understand. You lean into the Lord. And I would just submit this to everyone. My family's here, and you guys there. Whatever life brings to you, lean on the Lord rather than your own understanding. I don't understand, but I know my God does. And that's where I'll leave that.
And powerful words from Pastor Frank Pomeroy after a gunman interrupted service at his church Sunday, killing 26 people, including Pastor Pomeroy's own daughter. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this Wednesday. Today we have in-depth coverage on that tragic shooting down in that small town of Texas.
Well, that's right, Jenna. Obviously, first, though, a big election yesterday, really in New Jersey and in Virginia. Results have some asking what is going to happen next in the midterm elections coming up, and it's going to be interesting, Jenna.
That's the million-dollar question, of course. In Virginia, there was Ralph Northam. He's the Democratic governor-elect now. He won. He beat out Ed Gillespie. And in New Jersey, Democrat Phil Murphy, he pulled away with the win there. So I think, we're seeing a lot of coverage, a lot of headlines and different things about this possibly spelling trouble for President Trump in the future. But I think what people have to remember, and maybe all of you can kind of weigh in on this and tell us what you think, but President Trump is not necessarily a Republican. Where you have, Ed Gillespie, he is your traditional Republican candidate.
Well, that's right. And he's been in traditional Republican circles for a while. And so, the media loves to say, well, hey, Gillespie lost. But let's also remember, Ed Gillespie didn't want anything to do with Donald Trump. And I think that's important. Look, even the New York Times has this headline. I'll show it to you here. It says, Democrats score 2 big victories in Trump rebuke. They're calling this a Trump rebuke. More on that just in a moment. Let's go over some of the results. As you can see, Ralph Northam won in Virginia. He is now the governor-elect. He's the Democrat. He beat out Ed Gillespie, as Jenna was saying. And, of course, in New Jersey, you've got Phil Murphy, now a Democrat, who will be the governor in New Jersey, replacing Chris Christie. And, of course, in Virginia, just real quick back there, it was a clean sweep. I got to tell you, take a look. They're going to win the governorship, the lieutenant governor, the House delegate races. And so obviously the media, Jenna, is going to be talking all about how the Democrats are back in the game. But here's a couple things to remember. Newsflash, Virginia went for Hillary Clinton. New Jersey went for Hillary Clinton. Now, it'd be one thing if Democrats were rolling up wins in Oklahoma and Alabama. They're not doing it. Let's also remember this is 2017, an off-year election. It's not a midterm. It's not a presidential election. So the electorate is going to be much different in an election like this, especially. So, is there some cause for concern for Republicans and Trump? Of course, there's always cause for concerns. Virginia is definitely trending more Democratic, no doubt about it. But let's tone it down a little bit and understand that this could be more an anomaly than people think. I'm not convinced this is going to translate into midterm disaster for Trump, the Republicans.
Yeah,
so
don't jump the gun just yet.
That's
All right.
right.
Well, for more, we are joined by Skype by our White House correspondent, Jennifer Wishon. She's actually in Virginia. Jennifer, what do you think? Do you think these wins for the Democrats spell trouble for Republicans in the midterms?
Well, it's certainly a huge shot of enthusiasm in the arm of Democrats across the country today, and a warning sign for the GOP. Certainly in midterm elections, the president's party tends to struggle, right? We see that pretty much every cycle. And it doesn't help that right now this president is enjoying approval ratings, historic low approval ratings in the 30s. So that is certainly not going to help. But with that said, David, I think you made a very important point. New Jersey is a blue state, and Virginia is becoming more reliably blue. We have 2 Democrat U.S. senators here. It voted for Barack Obama twice, Hillary Clinton once. And so I don't think that this is necessarily a foolproof test case, if you will, as to how Democrats are going to perform nationwide. And also, we know that in politics, a year is an eternity. I mean, a week can be an eternity. Look at what happened in the last week of the presidential race in 2016. So there's a lot.
And there she went, Jennifer Wishon. The dangers of
and
Skype.
She's out.
I will say this, and hopefully we'll get her back, but our producer, Shoshana Nunez, talked about this Trumpism without Trump, and I think that was what was going on here. In other words, there's the Trumpism movement, but you got to have Trump. And Ed Gillespie was, this just in, Jenna, not Donald Trump. As a matter of fact, and no disrespect to Ed Gillespie, but you know, he's just not a guy that is the most charismatic guy in the world, and he keeps it buttoned down, and that's not Trump, and he's not going to appeal to the same voters that Donald Trump is appealing to, and I think that was a big part of it. Yeah. So hopefully we'll get Jennifer back at some point, and if we don't, well, then she's gone on into Skype land.
Beautiful background, though. Gosh.
Oh, I tell you what, what are we doing here?
Pretty nice. I know. We need to go out to Virginia. All right. Well, turning back to Texas, the shooting at the First Baptist Church in Sutherland Springs is being called the deadliest church shooting in U.S. history.
Well, that's right. But even in the face of such a horrific event, people are turning to God.
Grieving. Lord, what do I say? And then he told me what very well may be the most powerful verse in the entire Bible, and it's only 2 words. Jesus wept. Because when Jesus wept, he knew exactly what we're going through right now.
We need to hold each other tight and let each other know that we love them. You never know when that time comes that the Lord calls you home.
It's really nice to know that these people are supporting each other, and I think without each other and without God in our lives, like we would be lost.
People at that church, they're friends of mine, their family. And every time I heard a shot, I knew that probably represented a life. I was scared to death. I'm no hero. I am not. I think my God, my Lord, protected me and gave me the skills to do what needed to be done.
And the last voice you heard from that piece was one of the men who helped fight off 26-year-old church shooter David Patrick Kelly. When the shooting began, he grabbed his own gun, he ran across the street, and he exchanged fire with Kelly.
Boy, talk about a hero. You know, when events like this occur, you pretty quickly start to hear about all the gun control debate in the country. We know about this. A little later, we're going to actually talk to some big evangelical leaders about the role of guns in churches.
Yeah, but here is a little preview of some of the different viewpoints that you'll be hearing a little bit later on.
When pastors put out a call for all their people to bring their guns, arm up, come to church, packing, I remind pastors, wait a minute, you've been in the ministry as long as I have. The church is a family of God, and every family has dysfunctional members. We all know that from our own kitchen tables, right? We have troubled people in our homes, and we have troubled people in the house of God. When you ask troubled people to come to the church armed, you are asking for more sorrow, heartache, and possibly disaster.
I think it's so commonsensical to insist that whenever a small church or a sporting event has a service, or there's a sporting event at a school, I think that the smart thing to do is to have good people with concealed carry permits to be dispersed among those crowds and to be ready in case anything happens.
Yeah, so a lot more from Jerry Falwell, and both sides. I say both sides, the discussion, if you will. Oh, and look who's popped up, Ben Kennedy. Hello, Ben.
Hey there.
Good to see you. But ladies first. Hello, Amber Strong.
Yes,
good to see you.
Thank you.
Social seat, very busy today, so we got both of you going on because we got a lot of comments. Amber.
Right, because this is an important topic. So as you said, Ben is with us today. And of course, we want to connect with you. And you guys are already sharing some amazing thoughts and just the realistic points about what are churches supposed to do now. What are we as people of faith supposed to do now? I love this one right here from Edmund. He says, set up enough security, but especially all believers should pray. When we pray, mighty angels move, and that's where the battle is won. So he's talking about engaging, being smart and engaging in that physical battle, but also engaging in that spiritual battle as well.
And Amber, you talked about the spiritual battle. Many people are turning to God and to their faith to look for answers and exactly why this happened. I know when I covered the Vegas massacre, many people were wondering, well, where was God in all of this?
Yeah.
And Sylvia Sanchez wrote, I don't understand, but I do trust God. Also, Kathleen Washington added that long as you have faith, nothing can touch you. And that really is the truth.
Well, good. And it's a good point by Sylvia because it goes to the sovereignty of God. You know, I mean, if we're going to believe in God, we're going to believe in God. I mean, you know, he controls it all. And I know Paula White speaks to that, and that's someone we have on the program today. So thanks, guys.
Thank you both. Thank you both. And we'll, of course, be checking back in with Amber and Ben throughout the show. But first, the big question, Ben mentioned it, how the church moves forward, really, after a shooting like the one in Texas. Earlier, as you mentioned, we sat down with Pastor Paula White and Dr. Tim Clinton.
Well, that's right. You know, both of them play very important roles. Paula White, of course, the well-known national pastor, also one of the key faith advisors to President Donald Trump. And then there's Dr. Tim Clinton. He's president of the American Association of Christian Counselors. They were both in town this week. As a matter of fact, they're here in Washington on Wednesday as they lead the discussion about what can be done, basically, when it comes to the intersection of mental health and faith. So, have a look.
Well, Paula and Tim, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Honored to be here.
Paula, you've been up close to these mass shootings that we keep seeing, you know, the Pulse shooting in Orlando. When it comes to Texas, what should the church's response be here?
The first thing we do, Jen, of course, is we come together in prayer, and people think, well, prayer, but there's so much to that. We're also, when I say first responders, in the way that we have to be there in very tangible needs, that we're there for the community, for the families, for the victims, to pray, to walk through. When you're in that kind of trauma, I know when we went to Pulse, we were first responders as far as identifying families, members, praying, funeral arrangements, and it is a long process, a long road to recovery. So this is something that as a nation, we must come together through prayer, our faith, and action.
Tim, the psychology of all of this, what's the advice that counselors, that your organization can give at times like this? It's this is tough stuff here.
It is. You know, I think up front, a lot of what starts happening is the debates start, people start asking why. When I think of response, I think about who. What are we going to do? Who's going to show up? What really matters? And when you get the who piece right, it begins to change the game. It's one another. It's coming together. It's the ministry of presence. That's why Paula was saying, hey, we come together, we pray, because who? Because God, we really believe in who He is, and His presence matters to all of us. That's why we pray. We don't deny it, we rush to it, is what we do. And then in addition to that, the ministry of presence isn't necessarily coming in and offering all kinds of answers. It's saying we're here. These kind of situations, you don't have a lot of answers. When you're staring evil, sin, suffering, this kind of chaos in the face, but as we come together, we begin to develop strength and a course. We chart a path together. But up front, we're just here. That's the key.
Just be present.
Tim, why do you think so many of these mass shootings are happening? I mean, a lot of people will say it's a mental health issue, others a gun control issue, and as you were mentioning, you know, we live in a very broken world.
Yeah, I think we're in chaotic times. We have a broken world. Period. I think the pace, the pain, the pressure of modern day life is gobbling people up. We're on the edge. Margins gone. Tempers are flaring. Relationships are broken. We're not addressing a lot of these issues inside and outside of the church. And so because of that, we've got a mental health crisis that we've got to address. We've got to move into the space with everything we've got. And the upside of it is we can bring help. We can bring hope to the darkness. But when you're on the edge, you're on the edge. You hear what I'm saying? If you don't have anybody to talk to, any place to go, someone doesn't help you understand where you're at and what you're going through. And you think of the brokenness of the family through the years and more, the fatherless epidemic that's out there. A lot of these kids grow up in homes where they don't know how to do emotion regulation, and so they escalate quickly. You hear what I'm saying? Next thing you know, they just want to go to a place where they want to go off on somebody.
Right.
That's what scares me. And you can't always predict violent behavior in a person, but you can see signs of it, and we can respond to it. And when you look at these kind of situations, you often see where the mental health system is broken down. You hear what I'm saying? And we are not addressing it, but what we can do is we can come along. I'm encouraged by the church. I think the church is the place. The church needs to awaken and take her rightful place. As we begin to address these issues at another level, I think we can bring a lot of hope and healing.
Paul, I do want to ask you about the question that everybody asks, where is God in all of this? You know, a lot of folks just, they wonder, they go, what in the world? And I think we understand as Christians, about sin in Genesis 3.
Right.
So but take it from there. I mean, I'm just wondering, for Christians and non-believers that wonder, where is God?
It is the question, because we want answers that are concrete, and it's not that simplistic. We do know Psalm 46:1 says, God is our present help in time of trouble, and God is here for us. Now, I believe there are three agendas in the earth. There's man's, there's the enemy's, and there's God's. And because we are people of free will, I always say, until righteousness arises, evil will prevail. And so righteousness must arise. The church must take its place, as Tim was saying, through every different spectrum, through obviously prayer, our acts of faith, through worshiping God, but also through very practical ways. Righteousness must arise. And so God is here for us to comfort us in this time. I always say, the secret things belong to the Lord, or the mystery things, the revealed things to man. I don't believe we can understand this kind of random, crazy acts of evil, or try to say this was God, this was the enemy, this was man. It's evil. It's evil. And evil has to find someone to carry out its act.
Paula, you are close to the president. In a tough situation like this, how do you counsel him, and how can the Faith Advisory Council step in here?
He has surrounded himself with wonderful men and women of God, and of course, not only through prayers and counsel, and he immediately responded. His heart has always been for the people and for God's intervention and for God's divine plan. So again, you immediately saw him begin to respond with prayers, condolences, sympathy. And just as any person, our president also needs to be ministered to, as he carries the weight of this nation and much of the world on his shoulders. And so that's what is exciting, as we've seen so many faith leaders today. Again, 80 top mental health care leaders will be at the White House to work with chief and top staff people to be there. And to see this bridge come together and built is unprecedented. For people that have been in ministry and politics for 40, 50 years, they said, we've never seen anything like this.
Uncharted territory.
Uncharted.
Unprecedented.
Unprecedented. Thank you both very much.
Thank you.
Great for you to be here.
And that was Pastor Paula White and Dr. Tim, I always want to say Kane, Tim Clinton. Tim Clinton. We want to make a correction here. Earlier we said David Patrick Kelly, the shooter. His name is Devin Patrick Kelly. So quick correction there. It was interesting talking to them. I think you can't understate the influence, the impact that Pastor Paula White has on this administration and on the president. She is coming to Washington every week. She's based in Florida, but she's traveling around the world. She's in Washington, though, every week in that White House in key discussions, whether it's the child tax credit or these mental health discussions. She is right there in the mix of it all.
Yeah, and we've been dealing, as you know, we know Paula White for a while now, obviously, and she's known Donald Trump for, oh goodness, it's been 15 plus years, or roughly right around there. And the first time Paula White actually met Donald Trump was on a phone call, and we know this story well. But he called her after watching one of her sermons on the air, and recited the whole sermon back to Paula White. Anyhow, they have a lifelong friendship now, and I remember Paula White telling us what she told Donald Trump, which is like, look, I don't need your money, I don't need your fame, I got plenty of both. I want your soul. That's an actual quote from Paula White to Donald Trump, I want your soul, and I want to talk to you about God. And so that's how it began, and here she is in the White House, and God has a plan for all of this. Fascinating.
And some of you might remember she actually said the prayer at the inauguration back in January.
That's right.
Which, might I point out, it's hard to believe, but can you all believe this? Election day was 1 year ago today.
Was it today?
Yeah, time flies.
Right,
Wow.
so liberals are in mourning and in hiding.
They don't know what to do. A year later, they don't know. All right, well, Ben and Amber join us again, and what are people saying, you guys?
We have a lot of good comments, a lot of people weighing in just kind of on what their church is doing and how they are handling the situation.
You know what? The conversation is really rolling. We thank you guys for making an impact. This is really hitting close to home for many of you. Patricia said a great many churches already have security. To top that, Kathy got on board. Kathy Ann Mills said, we started this at our church. We have those who have gun permits, who act as greeters and ushers to make sure the congregation is safe.
Yeah. And I think that's very interesting. We got this comment from David, which also applies to that. He said, I have been carrying mine for several years, not to scare anyone, but because I love my church family. I was in law enforcement for a short time and have taught self-defense for 30 years. And I was sharing with the team here, that was basically what my church, what my home congregation did. We weren't a big church. We weren't a wealthy church, so we couldn't hire security guards. We couldn't get cameras installed. So we looked among the flock and we said, who's capable? And we had a member who was a police officer, and we said, do you mind working as a greeter? Just standing there in your uniform, that's all we need you to do. And that right there was enough of a deterrent, I believe, for anyone walking past a church. You see an officer standing there.
Well, and this is what the church does, right? I mean, when you need volunteers, they need a video editor. Well, I do some video editing for my job, so I'll be a video editor for the church. Same thing, police officer.
Yeah, precisely. Right. So here's a question for all of you out there to answer. What does your church do in terms of church security? Keep commenting below. Let us know how you handle it, particularly if you are one of those smaller congregations where you don't have the money to beef up security, and we'll try to get those responses here on air.
Nice.
All right. Well, guys, I have an interview coming up in just a bit. When we come back, I sit down with Fox and Friends host Brian Kilmeade. There he is. We hear his thoughts on the situation in Texas and how the president responded.
Israel and the Middle East, center of the world for thousands of years, and still creating headlines that reach back to the Bible. Hosted by award-winning correspondent Chris Mitchell, Jerusalem Dateline brings a Christian perspective to events that literally change history. Whether it's the front lines or underground, Jerusalem Dateline is your window to Israel, Jerusalem, and the Middle East. Contact us at the address on your screen.
All right, folks, we're back. Some swanky promos, by the way. Between hosting Fox and Friends and his weekday radio program, Brian Kilmeade is live on air, 6 hours a day, breaking down the country's biggest stories.
Yeah, Ben Kennedy is here with us. And Ben, you just went to New York and you spoke to him about a lot of different issues.
I did. Got back a couple days ago, and we were first heading to New York City to talk about his book here, Andrew Jackson and the Miracle in New Orleans. I'll get to more on that in just a bit, but we sat down with him in the wake of this tragedy. We got a chance to talk about his coverage of this and how to better protect people during a church service. So take a look. And I want to touch base on the Texas Massacre, your reaction when you heard the news.
It's unbelievable. I mean, it's there's no way making sense of it. I don't know how you get your head around that, except for you need to find out more information. Was he supposed to have a gun? No. Was he supposed to be able to get a license? No. So the question is, instead of why was this guy allowed to have a gun, which is normally the situation, you see it immediately become political. It's, okay, he wasn't supposed to, then how did he get it? So that's a little bit different. The other thing I'm struck at is the neighbor that hears the gunshot going on in the church, instead of saying, I'm calling 911, grabs his gun and goes out there. So that type of courageousness, I don't know where that comes from, but that needs to be saluted. And the fact that they hunted this guy down, or it could have been a lot worse. But in terms of a guy that walks into a church and shoots people who are at a church, as was pointed out to me by a security expert, is the church, sadly, is perfect for a killer because you're facing the other direction. You enter through the back. No one sees you come in. So this, for a twisted mind like this, sadly is perfect. And it makes you wonder, with all the volunteers that keep churches going, now they got to say, listen, we don't have the budget for it, but who wants to volunteer to do security? Who's been trained?
You brought up
and
a
I
good-
guarantee you that a lot of people will line up to do that.
And you brought up a good point there. Do you see people stepping up saying, hey, look, I'll go to the 8 a.m. service and then I'll come back at 9 and stick around till noon?
Right. I mean, people want to help out any way they can, whether it's whether it's helping out in the church on the weekends or whether it's being an usher. Why not just say, hey, listen, you have training in security. You're a retired police officer. Would you help us out by taking the 9 to 11 shift? You sit through a couple of masses and you keep people safe. Worse, what I think is actually even better is that just knowing that there's security there will keep guys like this away because they don't want to be confronted. They don't want to fight. They want to massacre. So if they say X, Y, and Z church is the parishioners allowed to bring guns, number one, and number two is there always security there, they're not going to be a target. It's very simple. They don't want a shootout.
Now, Brian, you talked to President Trump recently, interviewed him live here on the radio.
Okay.
In times of tragedy, President Trump continues to turn to his faith and prayer. Has he really used his faith as a cornerstone to deal with
I think
attacks?
so. And if you talk to all these religious leaders, evangelicals in particular, they're sold on. And they were early, even when there was 15 people. They kept saying to me, there's something about, there's something about candidate Trump at the time that we think he's all in for us. And so far, he's produced a lot of results. He's done a lot of things that the evangelical community is proud of.
Now, David, Jenna, Amber, I want to talk about what churches here in the D.C. area are doing. I'm actually gearing up to attend what is called a Worship Watch training for faith-based organizations. It's taking place in Manassas, which is a little less than an hour from our bureau here in D.C. Police and churches there are teaming up to help reduce the opportunity for crimes during services. Now, this was preset before the massacre in Texas, so it appears that communities nationwide are already taking a proactive approach.
Yeah.
They're already thinking about the what's next. As you heard Brian Kilmeade talk about, that his security expert pointed out that, look, churches are a perfect place for a massacre.
Yeah.
I mean, everyone's facing forward, and what's a gunman or someone who's looking to inflict harm, they don't want to be met with resistance. They want to hurt as many people as possible, and having that security in place or having a plan makes a huge difference, or could possibly make a huge difference, which your church is doing a great job.
Yeah, and it's funny that you say that because we got this comment in from Jonathan Deal, who says, we have police officers, current and retired, and a select few who have carry permits who provide security for our church. All team members must pass a background check and be approved by the board. So that is a church that has taken proactive steps and aren't reacting to what just happened, but a church that's already got a plan in place for the next time it happens. Yeah. We have this comment in too. This is from Kathy Anderson, who says, all of our church leadership carry a gun.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Also added on, we have security teams at our church, and she is just so thankful to have them in place. And Teresa brings up a good point. The last thing anybody wants to worry about at church is their safety and security. So to have someone behind you looking out for you, it's kind of like God's always looking out for us.
Yeah.
To having security looking out for them at church is just a peace of mind. And I don't blame churches, or I've taken this proactive step. And this was a small community, guys. I know they broke down the numbers. I believe 4 to 5% of this Texas community was killed in this massacre. So it's not just the big churches, the big mega churches that need this protection, but also the small ones.
I liked Rhonda. She wrote this. We are a small church. I just learned last Sunday our pastor carries a gun. I think it's a smart idea.
Yeah, and speaking about pastors carrying a gun, I do some speaking around the country, and there's a guy I met named Ken Graves. He's a pastor from Maine. He lives in a log cabin, so that's a story right there. We should do on Faith Nation. Anyhow, he's old school, shall we say, and he packs heat from the pulpit. He has a gun on him while he is preaching in Maine, and he says to his parishioners, look, folks here need to come in peace or they will go in pieces, is what he says. And that's his line. And yes, it's a bit rogue, but it gets a laugh. But the point is that he's not playing around.
Across,
that's right. It gets the point across.
Kim Grave just pointed out seconds ago, she said, keep the doors locked except for entry and place a couple armed ushers there. Problem solved.
Another idea.
idea. And if you are arriving late to church, which I'm sure we all have in the past.
I've never arrived late to church.
Having an usher there
Yeah.
could let the person in as well if they're a recognizable face or a new member.
Yeah.
It's a very complicated issue, how to better protect your church. And I think meeting with police and getting the conversation rolling, which we're doing right now here on Faith Nation, is a really important step.
It's definitely complicated, and we're going to hear in just a little bit about two different faith leaders talking about just how complicated it is, because it's easy to just say everybody start bringing your guns or everyone don't bring your guns. And so I think we're going to get the deeper discussion about.
We are. As a matter of fact, that deeper discussion is happening right now. Amber, thank you for the transition.
Always good for a segue.
That's right. We wanted to see, obviously, what some leading evangelicals thought about the issue of safety in churches, as Amber was saying.
Yeah, we got a chance to talk to Jerry Falwell Jr. about his thoughts on the topic.
Whenever a small church or a sporting event has a service, or there's a sporting event at a school, I think that the smart thing to do is to have good people with concealed carry permits to be dispersed among those crowds and to be ready in case anything happens. There's a local church here in town. All the deacons are armed on Sunday with concealed carry permits and concealed weapons. We have teachers at Liberty that also are armed just in case something happens in a classroom building. And we also have armed policemen here. But it's the only way to solve this problem. Gun control would have meant that the fella who shot at the assailant or the perpetrator on Sunday, he wouldn't have had a gun because he would have been obeying the law. There's no way you can make people who are determined to kill somebody obey gun laws. They have no interest. If they're willing to murder somebody, why in the world would they obey a law that says they can't have a gun? It's the silliest. I've never understood the argument, and I think most Americans think it's ridiculous. And so I wish we could just move on past even discussing that and start talking about how we can make sure that there are enough good people in every venue with guns, and that I think would add real security. Actually, the act of getting a concealed carry permit makes you an agent of the government, and I think it's your responsibility as a citizen to protect other citizens and to protect yourself, your family, and I think it's rooted right in Jesus' teachings. And it's just fortunate, and who knows where this killer was headed after he left. If he hadn't have been pursued by that neighbor who had a gun, a rifle, who shot at him, he might have had other ideas in mind. He might have been planning to kill other people. But we just need to make sure that good people have guns. That's what our founders, that's why they wrote the Second Amendment as a hedge against tyranny. And it's just, there's no way, if you had complete gun control, there's no way that you would collect all the guns. The bad guys are always going to get guns some way on the black market. And it's so hypocritical for people like Hillary Clinton to be calling for gun control so that the single mother in Chicago can't protect herself when Hillary has armed guards around her, surrounding her for the rest of her life. It's the most hypocritical thing in the world, and it's just time to. That debate has been raging for years, but it's time to end it and move on. And, it makes you wonder why liberals don't call for banning vans and trucks after we saw what happened in New York last week. It's silly, and so it's evil in people's hearts. Hearts need to be changed. Taking guns away is not going to keep evil people from doing evil things.
Yeah, it's a hard issue. Jerry Falwell Jr. there, president of Liberty University. Many of you might remember, this was a few years back, he picked up some flack because his school, they came up with a policy that allowed students to carry guns on campus, and there were regulations. They have to be 21. Other rules that go with it. But it was common sense stuff. It had to be stored in a safe in the dorms, that kind of thing. But he did pick up some flack for that. So this is a hot button issue.
Well, it's a hot button issue that Jerry Falwell is on, I don't want to say one side of, but we're starting to hear some evangelical pastors now, Jenna, that are actually very conservative in nature, starting to question or at least bring up maybe we do need a little bit more gun control as it relates either to the church or just the wider issue. So when we come back, we're going to have another faith leader, who I just basically talked about, offer his voice to the question of bringing guns into churches. Stick around. Back in a moment.
I want it to be God. I want it to be Christ.
Hey there! Make sure you check out my new uplifting Christian entertainment show, Studio 5.
Well, Jenna, we just obviously heard from Jerry Falwell Jr., who advocates for people with the proper training and licenses being able to bring guns to churches.
Yeah, he says it's a hard issue.
Yeah.
The sin issue. There are so many sides to this debate. We wanted to bring in a lot of different perspectives. So we talked to Reverend Rob Schneck from the National Clergy Council. Here is his take.
It's the conquering confidence that we have in God. So we have to be careful we don't go overboard, give in to our fears, and let fear begin to control us. It's the antithesis of faith. When pastors put out a call for all their people to bring their guns, arm up, come to church, packing, I remind pastors, wait a minute. You've been in the ministry as long as I have. The church is a family of God, and every family has dysfunctional members. We all know that from our own kitchen tables, right? We have troubled people in our homes, and we have troubled people in the house of God. When you ask troubled people to come to the church armed, you are asking for more sorrow, heartache, and possibly disaster than you are finding a cure for the problem. So we have to be wise as serpents, harmless as doves. Gun ownership and use has theological and moral implications. Anyone who carries a gun is ready to kill, or better be ready to kill. I've undergone professional firearms training. I'm a life member of the NRA. I have fired very powerful weapons at a shooting range. I know what it is to fire a Sig Sauer 226 or a Glock 9mm. They are very powerful weapons. And any good firearms trainer will tell you, if you're going to carry one of these, you must be ready to kill, and you must be ready to kill in an instant. And if your habit is to reach for a weapon in your time of need, that weapon will eventually become your God, and that's a form of idolatry. So what I started seeing was a danger of idolatry as people turned from heavenly protection to earthly protection. Again, that's not to say that we're to be foolish or reckless, but we have to be very cautious about the condition of our hearts. There is a theological, moral, spiritual implication here. When in our respect for the Second Amendment, we have to be very careful we don't violate the Second Commandment.
You know, Jenna, Rob Schneck, I mean, I've known him for probably about 15 years now. He's actually a Jewish believer. He grew up Jewish, just like myself, gave his life to Christ. And he's one of these major pro-life guys, been around town in Washington for a long time. He's the guy outside kneeling in front of the Supreme Court, praying. I mean, the liberals would call him the far right, for sure.
The media loves him.
Well, the media loves him because they want to caricature him and everything. And here he is saying, you know what, let's talk about this gun control issue. And so the fact that he's making these comments, I think, is, if not provocative, definitely makes you think twice, because a guy like this is saying those type of comments.
Right,
So,
it has a bit of weight to it, for sure.
Yeah.
All right, well, Ben and Amber, they join us again. A lot of people weighing in, you guys, I know, right? Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of comments. Well, first I want to talk about, we've been mentioning pretty much all afternoon long, ushers, pastors, somebody armed with a gun to protect the congregation. Well, we have somebody on the flip side. Kat Gregory says, my stance has always been there is never a need for anyone to be able to buy an automatic weapon. She points out that our military and police should be the only ones with automatic weapons.
Well, then you get into some Second Amendment issues
Correct.
there.
Yeah.
So,
Correct.
you know, I don't know if people are going to. Thanks, Kat, but I'm not sure that's not going to go anywhere on the Hill for sure.
Yeah.
But what do you got over there?
But that is a big part of the discussion that you've heard a lot of people point out specific guns and say these are the ones we don't want to see. But you're absolutely right. It's a Second Amendment question. There are a lot of people commenting also just on the overall conversation that we've had. We've talked a lot about guns, and there are people talking about the spirit world and the heart. Where should our hearts be right now? Should our hearts be turning to guns, which is kind of what Schenck was saying at the end. What do you reach for in your time of trouble? This is a good one from LaShonda. She's just sent us a verse from Proverbs 3:25. Be not afraid of sudden fear, neither of the desolation of the wicked when it cometh, for the Lord shall be thy confidence and shall keep thy foot from being taken.
Yeah, that's really good.
I will say this, that you know, maybe some closing thoughts, if you will. Isolation is of the devil. And we know that when he with a lowercase h, when the devil starts to isolate us, that's where the church community needs to come together. I mean, this is what community is all about. This is why we're in the small groups, and this is why we're trying to help one another along, and it's what Paula White was saying to us earlier. So I think that's really important to understand, and this is a time, you know, these church shootings, we need to understand that the devil wants us to be separated and alone with our thoughts, and I think when we get alone with our thoughts, let's just be honest, it becomes more concerning, and that's where the devil can strike. And so that's why I think it's important that the church come together at times like this.
Yeah, and I think also, you know, just the fact that we live in a very broken world.
Yeah.
And Pastor Paula White, she touched on that as well. And so it's you know, where is God in all of this? It's a complicated answer, as she said, that, you know, we're looking for concrete answers, but it's not always that simple.
No, it's not simple. Whether it be evil or God or Satan, but we know God is sovereign, but sometimes people want to blame God when that's not the case. It's a much broader discussion, for sure. So.
Well, hey, I think that does it for us, but please stick around. We're going to be sticking around for the next 10, 15 minutes or so, answering your questions, commenting with you, so please be sure to interact with us. We'd love to hear from you.
That's right. Also, make sure you join us next week, Museum of the Bible Week. Hey, DC next Friday. Can't wait.
There it is.
Oh, look at that. We're going to bring you some special coverage ahead of the event. Let's hope some good news is on the horizon next week. We could sure use it.
We're looking for some good news. I don't know about you guys, but we want some good news.
See you, folks.
All right.
Choose joy.